It's been a while since I've done a actual review of a Linux distribution, and I think maybe this video might give a good explanation as to why that is, because for the last I don't know, almost 6 months, if not longer than that, I've been using Linux Mint, and there's a couple of reasons why I've put off doing an actual video on it. Um, Part of the reason initially was there were certain video games that I was playing that I had to jump back into Windows to make a video on. And so I felt like I owed it to Linux Mint to give it a little more time because I had moved over to Windows to do some of my gaming. But at the end of the day, what it really boils down to is I just like Linux Mint, and I just didn't really feel like installing and trying anything else out. So, for the most part, I will say that this video talking about Linux Mint is kind of both a happy and a sad one because at the end of the day, I think that Linux Mint is a amazing distribution. And if you're new to the world of Linux, definitely give Linux Mint a try. It's something that I think will introduce a lot of people to Linux and do it in a very good, stable, and user friendly manner that you may not be able to say with a lot of other distributions. There's a reason why Linux Mint is consistently ranked or even mentioned as one of the first Linux distributions that people get recommended all the time. Um, and I'd say probably one of the big reasons for that is the desktop environment you see here on the screen. This is the Cinnamon desktop environment that comes default with the distribution. Now, they do have a Mate and an XFCE version of Linux Mint as well. Um, Probably very similar theming to what you see here in Cinnamon, but they're designed for even lower powered machines. So, personally, my computer that I'm running this on right now is it's an old computer. I'm not going to even try to trump it up any more than it is. The motherboard is well over 10 years old, so it is definitely not cutting edge. But let me go ahead and just start off by just bringing up the statistics on my computer here that you can see right here. And this kind of gives you a little bit of an idea about what you'll see at a baseline in Linux Mint. So because this is based off of Ubuntu 22.04, the long-term service release, you'll notice that the kernel is a 5.15 variant. And it's always going to be a 5.15 variant because that's going to be the long-term kernel for quite a while for this distribution. And that's kind of where my praise and my bit of a possible criticism for Linux Mint comes from. Linux Mint as a distribution is very well put together, very well designed. And if you're running older hardware, I mean, it's a no-brainer to give Linux Mint a try. The only problem that I can see in my mind where things would give you an issue is when you do start to use newer equipment. And it's also one of those things that will probably very soon make me have to move away from Linux Mint possibly because I'm planning on actually finally doing a computer upgrade since I haven't actually upgraded my computer in Lord knows when. But so with newer hardware, having a newer kernel where they get those hardware drivers into the kernel, it's something that as Mint goes on, it suffers and it lags behind other distributions because they don't get a major release except for every 2 years basically. Now, having said that, there's a lot of things that they do other than the kernel that keeps this distribution up to date because they are the ones who develop the Cinnamon desktop environment, you'll notice there the desktop environment version is 5.6.8. And basically, you will always have the latest version of the Cinnamon desktop environment because they're the ones who develop it. And there are other distributions that will probably be very close on the heels, like the rolling release distributions. But at the end of the day, you're going to get it here on Linux Mint first, whether that's for good or ill. For the most part, it's mostly for good. So even though the kernel doesn't really change, your desktop environment does. You always have the latest version with that. They like to implement Flatpak support for a lot of applications, and that means that even your applications themselves should be fairly up to date, if not completely up to date, because they're getting it directly from the Flatpak source. So really, at the end of the day, the only thing that really may hold Linux Mint back as a distribution is that kernel. And because they do focus on stability, I understand why they do it, but it does limit it if you are one of these people who likes to live on the bleeding edge of hardware. And it's definitely something to consider, that you may want to look at a different distribution if you are running cutting edge hardware. So moving inside there, you see what I have here as far as my own personal setup currently. And honestly, I just like everything about Linux Mint. It's just so easy to use and just good. And the thing is, it was even good. I think it's Linux Mint 21. It was even good when 21 came out, but then they had the audacity to make it even better. And let me show you why. This is the update manager. They actually made the update manager even better, because before in 21, all you could see were what was available from a distribution perspective. Well, now, and here's a good thing, a good example, you can update your Flatpak applications directly in the update manager. So that is just really, really good. Pretty much everything can be updated with one click from the little shield icon, I think you'd say, down here in the bottom right hand corner. So very easy to use for even novice users, basically, now with the 21.1 update. So it's just very new user friendly. And even if you're not a new user and you are someone who's fairly experienced, like I am, with using Linux, I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes you just want things to work, and you just want them to work without giving you a headache. Linux Mint does that for you. Now, there is one other thing I would point out that may hold Linux Mint back, and this is something that I think I discovered when I was playing Unreal on here. Because it was based off of Ubuntu 22.04, it just happened to show here, it's still using Pulse Audio. Is that something that may be holding this distribution back at this point? Possibly. And like I said, Unreal was the only example I've ever seen where I came into it where I couldn't get audio in the game and record with OBS Studio at the same time. And I have a feeling that may be due to Pulse Audio and the way the community patch worked for that game. It's the only game I've ever seen that happen on, and I think it may have something to do with Pulse Audio. Most of the distributions now, even Ubuntu past 22.04, have moved to Pipewire. So it's possible that Pipewire may alleviate some audio issues moving forward. So it's not just the kernel that's a little bit held back. There are some things like the audio subsystem that are also held back due to being a long-term service release. But for the most part, most of your desktop environment, your applications, they're always going to be up to date, and it's just very stable. Also, you notice I was running an NVIDIA card, as I still am doing, and honestly, I've done quite a few kernel updates, obviously minor kernel updates. It's still a 5.15 kernel, but I've done minor kernel updates and I've done graphics driver updates, and not once have I ever had any issues doing that on Linux Mint over the entire 6 months. Now, I don't update, constantly. Like, oh, look, there's an update. I'm going to do it immediately. I usually do my updates uh, once a week kind of thing. Now, whether or not that's a good or bad thing, I'll leave that up to your discretion. But basically, once a week, I'll just do my updates. And there is a backup utility built into Linux Mint, but honestly, I've never used it. I probably should, and I will start trying to get used to actually using that moving forward, because that would definitely be a more responsible thing to do as a user, to say the least. But let me just go ahead and bring up the actual menu here. So this is what the Cinnamon menu looks like. You see here at the top, they have all applications highlighted, but you see you've got your Firefox built in, even though I personally prefer to use the Brave browser. But you have the software manager, which we'll get to in a minute, the system settings, and you can also pull up another terminal or just basically your file system. Of course, shut down, restart, logging out, or locking screen. Now, obviously, I have installed quite a bit of software on here, but for the majority of default programs, it's another thing that Linux Mint does very well. Most of the default programs that they installed, I like. The only one that I wasn't a big fan of would be, I don't know, I guess it's under accessories. I think they call it Reader, or basically the PDF viewer. Oh yeah, document viewer. It works. It's not bad. Obviously, like the ones I've run on the GNOME desktop environment, I absolutely can't stand that document viewer or the PDF viewer. But at the end of the day, it's a good PDF viewer, but I have my preference for Okular. I still think that Okular is a much better PDF viewer. So from that perspective, that's the one I do like to go with, and that, once again, Flatpak, so it works very well. But other than the PDF viewer, I mean, they have the LibreOffice suite. The video player is actually really good. See, where would that be? Sound and video. I think they added VLC media player. I don't think I added that. I think it was part of the distro at one point. Now, by default, they have the Celluloid program, and as far as the video player is concerned, that's actually pretty good. I kind of like it. It's not bad at all. So yeah, I mean, even out of the box, most of the default applications that are installed will be very useful to the majority of users. Especially, it's not when you start getting into be more of a power user, where you have to start installing a lot of extra stuff that Linux Mint may be hindered. But to be honest with you, I've always found pretty much anything I ever needed in the Software Center, which is right here. So this is the software manager that is built into Linux Mint, and it works great. It's kind of funny. There's a play on Linux here. I was actually thinking of installing this not that long ago. Let's see here. So this one here lets you know this is a system package. If you notice right here, it's got the little LM symbol. So you're installing a system package, and that's the only option you have. Let me see if I can find something that might have an alternative. Oh, you know what? I know something. Something I just uninstalled not that long ago. DOSBox X. So you notice here how it says FlatHub. Well, actually, DOSBox is a great example. At the very top, you see DOSBox. There's a package that comes from the repositories, and then you have a FlatHub option. So that's another nice aspect here on the software manager where you can tell fairly easily what you're installing. Is it a package, a Debian based package, or is it something from FlatHub? And so you can usually tell pretty quickly what you're going to get there. And obviously, a FlatHub, for the most part, will be more up to date than something that you pull from the repositories. I say for the most part because I don't know when the last time actual DOSBox got updated, so I don't see any benefit to actually installing the FlatHub version of DOSBox. Whereas if you're trying to do DOSBox Staging or DOSBox X, that's another story altogether. But anyway, yeah, the software manager, it's very complicated. Not complicated, excuse me. It's very complete, very easy to navigate. And they even have a Flatpak category where you just click here and you know that you're pulling everything from FlatHub. So it just is a very good software center. I've used different ones like for Pop OS through was it KDE Discover, I believe is the name of the program there, or the GNOME Software Center. And so I think that this software manager compares very favorably to them, at least in my eyes. And pretty much anything that I really needed, I've been able to find here at a moment's notice. Now, there may be some people that are, you know, our snobs have been using Arch Linux, and they say, "Oh, the AUR has so much more software." And for those people, then perhaps yes, maybe this is a fairly limited software center for you. But for the majority of users, I think you're going to get everything you need right here from the software manager, and it's just very easy to, navigate and see what type of package you're installing. It's just great. Moving on, another nice aspect for Linux Mint and possibly the Cinnamon desktop environment in general is this nice system settings menu where there's a lot of customizability that you can do with the operating system. One of the things that I like to do is I like to go into the backgrounds and you can turn on a slideshow or you can turn the slideshow off. So I personally like the slideshow. It's the fact that the slideshow is built into the desktop environment. I don't have to install a third-party program. That's something for me that is just awesome. I like it. Here, let's just swap the background real quick. There we go. That's nice. Themes. Another thing about Linux Mint, with the Cinnamon desktop environment, you're always hard pressed to do better theming than the Linux Mint team. They make Cinnamon look really, really good. Just the default environments are awesome. Now, for here, you'll notice on applications, I have Mint X Red, which is more of a dark gray type color, which I like the dark red, minty dark red. I like that color scheme, but I found like when I open stuff like LibreOffice, like the Word document, basically, it's I guess it wouldn't be a Word document since Word is Microsoft, but you get what I'm talking about. The document program. It's hard to read some of the toolbars, the icons, basically when you have a dark theme. Otherwise, personally, I would probably keep this on minty dark red, but I find that when it comes to productivity, the Mint X Red, which is kind of not light but not dark, so it's kind of halfway in, that's the best looking one for me personally. But obviously, your mileage may vary. But you can tell just from here, look at the amount of different themes that you can choose from, or components to the theme that you can choose from, I should say. And this is all default in Linux Mint. So when it comes to theming, they're just very good at the desktop environment. And you'll be very hard pressed to find better theming. Now, you can go to the Cinnamon Spices webpage and download custom themes there and apply them that way. I think you can even add remove themes right here just by going to the internet and looking directly here. But for me, I just like the default theme, so I just keep using it. Now, a nice thing is, I think all these themes are kept in the user share themes folder. So moving forward, when I do try out different distros in the future that use the Cinnamon desktop environment, I'm going to be bringing these Linux Mint themes with me because they're just that good. And so I like them. Theming is amazing on Linux Mint Cinnamon, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff. A lot of it I haven't even really delved into and tried out, like these applets and whatnot. A lot of people like to use those, like they may have like a weather widget or something like that on their desktop. That's not something that I really like, having a lot of, you know, icons and things on my desktop. But if you are a person who likes those aspects, you have the customizability here to do that. You see, here's the display, so you can actually set up. I'll show you how I have my. Well, it's only showing one mirror display, so my TV's off. But basically, I mirrored my two displays so they're both running at 1080p. But you can play around with your displays and whatnot here, and it actually shows this nifty little mirror displays in the top left-hand corner. That's kind of neat. Otherwise, it might show you a 1 or 2 if you actually, or 3, depending on how many monitors you're running, basically. It just works very well. Let's see here, the driver manager. This is the thing that really works great with NVIDIA cards. And oh, look at that. They've upgraded the driver. I should upgrade. I didn't realize that was recommended now. Because at the time, I think when I had this set up, I was using 5.15, and 5.15 was the recommended version. But yeah, I mean, you can swap to different versions of the NVIDIA driver depending on your hardware. If you're running a really old NVIDIA card, they have drivers for like 390, 470 for those types of video cards that can't support the newer packages. And then, of course, you have the open source NVIDIA driver built in here. As far as that's concerned, I don't think anybody who wants to do any gaming or whatnot would even truly give that a consideration at this point in time. It's possible that in the future it may catch up to the proprietary driver, since I think NVIDIA has been reluctantly starting to give up some sort of stuff to the open source community. But I wouldn't hold my breath on the Nouveau driver being good anytime soon. But that being neither here nor there, the actual proprietary drivers, it's very easy with this driver manager. Just point, click, install, reboot, all good to go. And like I said, not once have I ever had any issue with a kernel update or anything like that when updating my system. So just good all the way around. And there's a lot of, like you see here, there's just a lot of things that you can tinker with, play with to your heart's content, and make the desktop environment something that would be more familiar to you, basically. As far as I'm concerned, even out of the box, I think it looks and functions the way I want a desktop environment to work. So honestly, at this point, for me, I feel that Linux Mint is it's just one of the best distributions out there. It is well supported. It's Ubuntu based, so anything that you can think of for Ubuntu, for instance, for me, my Wi-Fi dongle with this kernel 5.15, that Wi-Fi dongle works very good. It's kind of sad. My Wi-Fi dongle is actually probably my newest piece of equipment on this computer. And I needed a newer Linux kernel to get it working properly. So 5.15 is one of those kernels that does work very well with my Wi-Fi dongle. So a lot of troubleshooting stuff that you can use with Ubuntu. Almost everything works, for the par for the course here on Linux Mint, because that's what it is at the base. Now, I don't have a lot of experience using snaps, and I know it's a very controversial topic in the Linux community, but snap is one of those things that has been removed from Linux Mint. And if you're one of those people that are very anti-snap, that's another benefit to using Linux Mint, because it's basically just repository and Flatpak by default. Now, like any of these distributions, you can add snap support if you want. So if you do like snaps, you can add them. It's just not there by default. And, like I said, for good or ill, depending on what side of the fence that you fall on. It seems, from what I hear a lot of people say, I think a lot of people prefer Flatpak to snap. So if you're in that camp right now in the Linux community, you'll be happy with Linux Mint, because they do focus on Flatpak rather than snap. But other than that, I mean, there's just not anything else to say about this distribution. I mean, I've talked at length about how great this distribution is, because it really is. I mean, someone's new coming to Linux, without too much hesitation, I will recommend Linux Mint all day, every day. The only reason why I may not recommend it, and I think one of my coworkers I talked to many, many months ago, and this is way before Linux Mint 21 came out, he was having issues because he was running some of that cutting edge hardware and he couldn't get it to work. And at the time I told him, I was like, oh, well, with Linux Mint, you have to download the advanced hardware support version that had a newer kernel, because I think he had a very high-end Radeon, not Radeon, well, it may have been Radeon, may have been his Radeon graphics, or maybe his Ryzen GPU. I forget which one it was he was mentioning. And I said, you're going to need that newer kernel so that you can get it to work, because the previous version of Linux Mint, I think, was stuck on the 5.4 kernel, and it wouldn't recognize his CPU. So from that perspective, if you're running very new hardware, that would probably be the only reason I wouldn't recommend Linux Mint to you as a go-to. Outside of that, though, for the majority of users, if they're trying to get introduced to the world of Linux, this is the way to do it. I don't want to say it's a perfect distribution, but it's pretty dang close. Definitely, I'd say 9 out of 10, but I'd say 95%. Linux Mint is one of the most polished distributions, and very new user friendly as well. If you haven't given Linux Mint a try, or you're thinking about getting into Linux, this is where you should start easily. Anyway, that's my thoughts on this distribution. I've been using it for 6 months. I like it. It works really good. There are some issues with, more for me, because I've done a lot of games that are very tied to Windows, and the Wine community has ignored them because they're so dang old. So they didn't care to try to get them working with the new versions of Wine. That's really not a knock on Linux Mint. Steam and everything like that works great. So I think for most users, this version of Linux will probably be one of the best for them to try. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. I'll see y'all in the next one. Take care.